It is not difficult to create a platform with similar functions to YouTube. But making a platform like YouTube is very difficult. YouTube is already crowded with creators and users. In one day there are enough videos to watch for over 20 years. If you want a lot of people to watch, you have to upload a video to YouTube, and if you want to see a lot of videos, you have to use YouTube. Numerous companies advertise here, and YouTube distributes advertising revenue to video producers. Then YouTubers upload more interesting videos to get bigger revenue, which attracts more viewers. This is possible because we have already secured a large number of users. This is not something you can say to pour money into. And Google is not a company where money can be pushed. Taijaju said. But, can't we eat the game broadcasting market using Sarana? Game broadcasting requires permission from the game company, but we are the ones holding the key. If we create a specific platform and allow Sarana game broadcasting only there, both those who want to make videos and those who want to watch will inevitably flock there. Yes, but how long will you come? Taeyong said confidently. A role-playing game is a role-play. It starts with a TRPG, where an ordinary student or office worker plays a wizard or a knight. And MMORPGs, large-scale multiplayer role-playing games, are a huge collection of such characters. So, Vermorp, enjoyed by hundreds of millions of people, is not just a game but itself becomes a world and history. Then a lot of people want to know what is going on there, and don't they want to know? I thought of Disney and Netplay. Disney decided to stop supplying content to Netplay and set up its own platform because it is confident that people will come to watch its content. Was I thinking too lightly because I was stuck in the frame of a game? As Taekyu said, this is not a game but a huge world. Maybe Disney can put the content it has built up over decades into a single game. Disney continues to create new content using existing animations and characters. Theme parks, character industry, musicals, live-action films, etc. Marvel, which was acquired by Disney, sold the Spider-Man movie rights to Sony Pictures about 20 years ago for a low price of $10 million. At that time, Marvel's management was extremely difficult, and there was no interest in filmmaking. Interestingly, at the time, Marvel was trying to hand over the rights to other characters' movies for $25 million. But Sony Pictures refused and took only Spider-Man. As the Spider-Man movie series made by Sony Pictures became a hit, Marvel also set up its own studio and started making films with other characters, now earning trillions of dollars from one movie. In this way, depending on how you use the content, you can generate additional revenue. Sarana's success will greatly grow not only the game market, but also the game broadcasting market, and many creators will start producing content competitively. If you just let YouTube do this, you're only doing good things. If we can exclusively broadcast content enjoyed by hundreds of millions of people, wouldn't it be possible to create a platform that can compete with YouTube based on this? Taeyong shrugged his shoulders. Well, or not. I shook my head. No, that's a great idea. I looked through the relevant material. Video sharing platforms including YouTube were focusing on securing creators who broadcast games and attracting exclusive content. Videos related to Lost Fantasy were also substantial. After a movie or drama is released, it is only watched and reviewed, but a game can continuously create new images through play. While we were making money from our games, YouTube was also making money using our games. Well, there's nothing wrong with publicity, but in recent years the content market has grown rapidly. There may be reasons for the development of the internet, communication networks, and production technology, but the main reason is that the working hours have decreased and leisure time has increased. This is also due to the fact that labor productivity has greatly increased due to technological advances. Working hours will continue to decrease in the future, and the content industry will grow even more. I held a meeting and summoned the team leaders. After listening to my explanation, Sanjiop Sr. said, "But isn't the game a bit lacking in popularity? Unlike movies, dramas, and animations that almost everyone enjoys, games are mostly played by people. No matter how successful Lost Fantasy mobile and online are, there are many people who do not know or are not interested in them. Taijiu said. In other words, it means that the market is likely to expand that much. I said with certainty. The Vermorp Xerana released by OTK Games is sure to succeed. It will go beyond games and become a genre of popular culture enjoyed by people all over the world. Team leader Seo Sanghyun asked. How many users do you predict? Wouldn't it be 500 million people? Everyone looked shocked at my words. It's hard to believe that about a tenth of the world's population plays the same game. Taijiu said. It is by no means impossible. Not only Korea and Japan but also the United States, China and India. Rather, it is likely to be more successful in emerging and developing countries. Gaming is the least expensive leisure activity. Do you not need any equipment to run the game? It would be an insignificant amount for workers in emerging countries. Taekyu replied as if it was natural. There are PC rooms and PS rooms for those people. Considering how much money the PC room owners raked in the early days of StarCraft, this is also a promising derivative industry. They were skeptical about the number of users, but they all agreed that it was necessary to predict the economic, cultural, social and industrial changes following the success of the game and prepare accordingly. Taekyu asked the head of the PR team. I want to make a game video sharing platform. Is there any good place? Team leader Jong Ki-hong responded vigorously. I'll find out right away, Deputy Chief. As part of its social contribution activities, OTK Company collaborated with Golden Gate to create OTK Gate. This is a shared office that supports startup space. Not only did they share offices, but they provided legal services such as company establishment, partnership agreements, patent acquisitions, equity purchases, company sales and closures, various advisory services in corporate activities and connected angel investors. The OTK Gate, which first started in Gangnam, has since expanded to Gangbuk and the metropolitan area, and is now built in each metropolitan city. Korea's shared office market was practically close to short-term office rentals. Although it has the advantage of reducing various incidental costs such as real estate brokerage fees, utility bills, internet costs and furniture purchase costs, the cost was prohibitively expensive even considering that point. However, compared to the cost of OTK Gates at 20%, the facilities and services are better. As the space continued to expand, so many founders wanted to move in, so they had to be selected through a screening process. It didn't matter when there was only one OTK Gate in Gangnam, but as it spread across the country, companies that were running shared office businesses expressed dissatisfaction. However, they also tried to differentiate themselves by lowering rents and strengthening services. As the startup environment has greatly improved, more and more young people are taking up the challenge of starting a business. Korea has a disadvantage in that the market size is small compared to the US and China. But there were also advantages. It has the world's highest internet speed, smartphone penetration and computer use rate, and a whopping 20 million people live in the metropolitan area alone. Here you can experiment with new ideas and products. Global IT companies dominate the internet market, including search sites, SNS and shopping malls. However, there was clearly a gap. At OTK Gate today, many founders were trying to find new opportunities. The most successful company here is Pool Riding, which created a carpool service. This startup, created by students from Hankook University, was acquired by K Company for $15 billion. This gave a good stimulus to other founders as well. If you have a good idea and the ability to put it into practice, you have witnessed before your eyes that you can succeed. After graduating from the Department of Electronic Engineering at Hankook University, Yeom Tak-hoon got a job at a large corporation. Fortunately, he succeeded in moving into the OTK Gate. What they envisioned is an application that allows anyone to easily create and share videos. As YouTube is getting bigger and bigger, it is difficult to attract subscribers without high-level video shooting and editing skills. There were even academies that specialized in filming and editing. So we developed an application that allows you to shoot short videos with your smartphone, edit them and easily add various effects and BGM. The idea was good, but the road to starting a business was not easy. What is most lacking is funding. I met with investors and tried to persuade them, but they were all negative because there were many existing large companies. After lunch, Takhun Yom rented a conference room with his staff after lunch. Since there is no money to spend on publicity, we are going to strengthen the community function and attract new users through word of mouth. But towards the end of the meeting, suddenly there was a commotion outside. Everyone turned their heads out. What? What's up? Someone shouted outside. You came after the gang, Jean. What, Jin Hukong? I'm coming up in the elevator now. Wow. Really? The people in the conference room were startled. Jin Hukong made the OTK gate and the company is nearby. Even so, she was a very busy person, so she hardly ever visited this place in person. Aren't we supposed to go out too? I don't have much time left, so I won't be able to use the conference room when I come back. Is that important now? The meeting can be held later in the cafe. Yes. Do you want to see your face after the earthquake or now? That's right. Kong Jinhu is a superstar in this industry. No, she was more than a star, she was a mythical being. He is the most famous investor of the 21st century, and became the world's richest person in his 20s. What's even more surprising is that he got to that position on his own without any property he had inherited from his parents. Is there any joke in the world that only Korean politicians are funny after the earthquake? Would it be possible to get one autograph? Opportunities like this do not come every day. Yom Takhun, who was about to run out of the conference room, realized that there was no need for that. Because Jin Hukong entered the conference room. Yom Takhun has always emphasized to his staff that he is 5 years older than Kong Jin. But when he met, he bowed his back 90 degrees. Hello, CO Kong Jinhu. It is an infinite honor to meet you like this. The staff looked like they knew it. You must have been in a meeting. Oh yes. That's right. Am I not disturbing you? Oh no. I am always grateful to be able to work in this space. Jin Hukong sat down on an empty chair naturally. Nothing else, but I'm interested in the to-go box. Yes. For a moment he looked at the staff, wondering if he heard something wrong. Seeing that the employees are also making expressions that they must have heard it wrong, I don't think they heard it wrong. Suddenly, Kong Jin, who is interested in our company. Yom Takhun swallowed his saliva involuntarily. At that moment, everyone in the conference room had the same thought. Is this the chance of a lifetime? There is a saying, you get hit by AMZ. AMZ, which started as an online bookstore, has expanded to online shopping malls, cloud, news, content production, streaming, AL speakers, devices, advertisements, pharmaceuticals, insurance and finance. AMZ's expansion strategy was simple. Instead of entering the market and pursuing profits, even if it makes a large loss, it first increases the size as much as possible. When economies of scale are created, they lower costs further and attract more users at lower costs. In that way, it is to take down the competitor with the game of chicken and then take over the market completely. AMZ hit was used to mean that if AMZ enters the industry, there is only one thing left to do, is ruin the competitors. Economists use the coined word OTK to compare it. When Jin Hukong first invested in Keris, Face It and M-Pizza, no one cared. But those companies have driven out their current competitors and have almost dominated the market. Therefore, when OTK company took over a startup called Togobox that produces and shares videos, rumors spread throughout the industry in an instant. Although there is no immediate change, the related companies did not let go of tension. Everyone knew roughly what the OTK company had acquired the video platform for. Are you aiming after the Vermorpg is released? Recently, the biggest issue in the game world is Lost Fantasy Online, which is currently popular, and Vermorpg with a development plan announced. OTK Games said that it would still allow internet broadcasting on all platforms regarding Lost Fantasy, but the policy is likely to change once Vermorpg is released. Wouldn't it be possible to allow game broadcasting only on its own platform and ban others? Or operate it in such a way that only other platforms receive a fee? Either way, they won't just watch them monetize the content they create. But wouldn't that be a case of success? It means you have the confidence to be successful. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend $10 billion on development. With this incident, Vice President Oh Taek-yu received new attention. The fact that the vice president wore a mask and broadcast the game was known through Chairman Im Jin-young, who appeared on the broadcast. Is that the purpose of checking the marketability of game broadcasting, not travel? I'm sure I'll do the test after putting on the mask myself. It's something I can't do. Is the Iron Man mask a provocation against Disney? Before Kang Jin-hoo's appearance, Warren Buffett was the best investor in the world, and he is still admired and respected by many. The person he considers his partner, friend, and teacher to be the vice president is Charlie Bain. There is an anecdote that Warren Buffett always consults with Charlie Bain when he's unsure about an investment, and at the end slaps his knee and exclaims, "You're right, Charlie Bain." Maybe Kang Jin-hoo and Oh Taek-yu are the same. Compared to Jin-hoo, Kang, the vice president, Taek-yu Oh, is hardly known to the public. But the financial world was already grasping the information. He is Jin-hoo Kang's middle school classmate, and he only graduated from high school. He may think that he is a high school graduate, but there is nothing more meaningless than an academic background on this floor. If not, are all geniuses with all kinds of careers such as Harvard University, Yale University, MBA, and CFA working under someone else? I don't think it's a joke that the vice president is in power. Looking back, it was the deputy representative who first established OTK Company and invited Kang Jin-hoo. It is necessary to keep an eye on the movement of the vice president in the future. Maybe even more vigilant than Kang Jin-hoo. KEPCO posted the largest deficit in history. The stock price was cut in three, not even in half, and investors poured fire on the government. The reason for this is that the utilization rate of nuclear power plants has fallen sharply this year. Although KEPCO is a publicly traded company, it is a public company. Because of this, they are subject to government control. When the international oil price rises, the refinery raises the price of gasoline and diesel it sells. However, since electricity rates are set by the government, not by KEPCO, KEPCO has a structure in which it makes a profit when the cost of electricity production decreases and loses when it increases. Although it is said to be temporary, this state cannot be allowed to persist. In the end, you have to choose one of the three. Either increase the operation rate of nuclear power plants to lower costs, raise electricity rates, or the government compensates the deficit through taxes. The government showed a sign of embarrassment, but insisted that there would be no increase in electricity rates. Electricity cost is directly related to inflation, and it is not a problem that can be easily dealt with, as there are concerns that an increase in the cost of electricity will damage the low-income class, especially when it comes to elections. Under such circumstances, Professor Nikolai Petrov, who is leading the development of TWR, visited Korea. As Isaac Newton said, "You can see far away because you sit on the shoulders of giants." New ideas and technologies are built on the foundations laid down by mankind. But even a tall man with good eyes can see even a little further, even if he is sitting on the shoulders of the same giant. In this respect, Professor Nikolai Petrov was certainly a genius. Having succeeded in the TWR experiment, he solved the problems one by one. Now, commercialization was only a matter of time. As miniaturization and modularization are possible, it is planned to be manufactured for ships as well. If TWR is loaded as fuel, it will have tremendous economic feasibility compared to conventional marine oil. It can dramatically reduce fuel costs and eliminate the need to refuel in the middle of a long voyage. Of course, safety measures should be prepared for various marine accidents. The Russian government actively supported the construction and export of TWR, and all countries with plans to build nuclear power plants joined the TWR camp with great interest. This included NATO members, which had economic sanctions against Russia. After waiting for a while, Professor Petrov and his companions walked out of the departure hall. Nuclear physicists are regarded as important figures in any country, but after the development of the TWR, Professor Petrov was designated as a national security target. For this reason, bodyguards belonging to the Russian government followed suit on this trip to Korea. The 8-headed men in black suits caught up on either side of him, wearing sunglasses and with ears in their ears. However, if anything happens to him, it could turn into a diplomatic issue between Korea and Russia. For this reason, the NIS staff paid full attention to security, such as controlling part of the departure hall. I welcomed him. It's nice to see you in Korea. Professor Petrov smiled brightly. Haha, it's been a while. A middle-aged, hairless man standing next to me bowed his head politely and spoke in English. Welcome to Korea. This is Kim Yong-jun, President of Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power. Professor Petrov shook his hand. Nice to meet you. I have known about Korea's excellent nuclear power technology for a long time. I am glad to meet you like this. Professor Petrov's trip to Korea was made at my invitation. First, he will visit Hankook University to meet professors and students from the Department of Nuclear Engineering, then tour the Korean nuclear power plant facilities with other researchers and meet with KHNP officials. The Blue House did not take a special position, but the world paid attention to Professor Petrov's visit to Korea. In particular, the expectations of the Korean nuclear power industry were very high. I headed to Korea University with Professor Petrov. Professors from Korea University had already gathered in one place. Professor Myung-jun Kim smiled. I don't know how many Nobel Prize winners I have met thanks to my pupils. Professor Petrov hasn't received it yet. This year, without knowing it, won't it definitely ride in physics next year? It would be. If you don't give it to me, that would be weird. Professor Petrov was welcomed by professors from the Department of Nuclear Engineering, nurturing the best nuclear engineers in Korea. Emeritus professors who could be called elders also came to visit. These people who developed Korea's nuclear power plant technology on bare ground are now gray-haired elderly people. Without them, Korea would not have dreamed of building a nuclear power plant with its own technology. The lecturers were given priority to students from the Department of Nuclear and Nuclear Physics. First, students from Hankook University applied and then students from other schools. The remaining seats were occupied by engineering students from Korea University. Engineering students gathered in the auditorium. Even a simple chair in the warehouse was mobilized, but there were still not enough seats, so some of them sat up to the stairs. Opportunities to meet world-class scholars are rare. Among them, to his surprise, the figure of Princess Enrique was also seen. No, I'm not surprised that I'm now an engineering student at Korea University. I got on the podium first and said to the students, introducing Professor Nikolai Petrov. After the Nishida securities incident that shook the international financial world and Japanese politics, Prime Minister Okazaki dissolved the House of Representatives and held a general election again. The result, as before, was a victory for the LDP. Although the whole world was aware of the peculiarities of Japanese democracy, the LDP's re-election was a surprise. What kind of government can win the election even if it blows away 2 trillion yen of the National Retirement Fund? Read more at wuxiax.com. Although they succeeded in re-establishing power, the LDP's number of seats decreased significantly. However, the Democratic Party, the main opposition party, did not increase the seats either. So who took the remaining seats? It was none other than the Japan Innovation Association that made the most strides in this general election. The LDP, as we all know, is a conservative right-wing party. However, the Japan Innovation Association is a far-right party that cannot be compared to him. Compared to them, the LDP seemed to be a moderate center force. The Nishida securities crisis has made Japan a laughingstock all over the world. What happened to the slogan that Prime Minister Okazaki promised to bring back the strong Japan of the past? When will the constitutional amendment to a normal state take place? How long does Japan have to bow its head while only paying attention to neighboring countries? Kato Nakamura, president of the Japan Innovation Society, shouted that if he wins and becomes prime minister he will hold South Korea accountable, even if he goes to war. Japan protected Korea from the Western powers and led Korea on the path of modernization. However, Korea is not even aware of that grace and is desperate to devour Japan. They faked the fact that they were comfort women and forced laborers, claiming compensation from Japan, and plundered 2 trillion yen of Japanese people's retirement funds by defrauding them. Since when did Japan become such a happy country? I and the members of the Japan Innovation Association will definitely hold the Korean government accountable and put it back to normal. Even within the LDP, lawmakers from the anti-Okazaki faction who belonged to the minority left the party on a large scale and transferred to the Japan Innovation Association, and the far-right populism was properly blocked, and the Japan Innovation Association succeeded in increasing the number of seats from only 11 to 73. The Nishida securities scandal is also related to the Prime Minister's personal corruption, so it was wisest not to talk about it at all. Prime Minister Okazaki and Liberal Democratic Party lawmakers declined to comment as much as possible, but the Japan Innovation Association continued to push the issue. Members of the Japan Innovation Association also made hardline remarks in the National Assembly. Jin Ho-kong should get down on his knees and apologize. We need to fix Korean burlesque hair. It is impossible to reclaim Takashima at this rate. Several ties with Korea should also be considered. Governor Nakamura Kato argued that the Nishida securities crisis should be resolved together with the issue of compensation for forced labor and the issue of comfort women. It seems like there are multiple problems, but the essence is simple. That is, Korea is trying to subdue Japan and extort money. The solution is also simple. The Japanese government should hold the Korean government accountable with the determination that it is willing to cut off diplomatic ties and avoid war. If we are pushed out of here, Japan will become a laughingstock of the international community. From the perspective of the Japan Innovation Association, it was like holding a flower viewing plaque. If Prime Minister Okazaki stays still, he just has to keep pouring accusations, and when he takes action he can boast of himself as thanks to them. The LDP was also well aware of this, but in order not to be pushed back, it had no choice but to take a hard line. Prime Minister Okazaki issued his official statement. I urge the Korean government to promptly resolve the issue of seizure of Japanese companies following the OTK company's compensation and apology, implementation of the Comfort Women Agreement, and judgment on compensation for forced labor. In case of actual damage to Japanese companies, the Japanese government will respond with various sanctions such as tariff hikes, restrictions on transactions with related companies, and restrictions on remittance. At the time of the Nishida securities order mistake, OTK company was heavily criticized. It is not uncommon to profit from ordering mistakes. The problem is that I ate too much. However, if Nishida Securities received sympathy, that is not the case. On the contrary, if I had been cursed more than OTK company, I would have eaten more but not less. In the financial world, a worse person than a robber is a robber. There is no room for sympathy for providing a cause for robbery in the first place. Hyunju Nuna said with a laugh at the place where she went to consult on countermeasures. Can we sanction Korean companies and suspend financial transactions with Korea? That's funny. The trade deficit with Japan alone is 30 trillion won a year. In other words, Japan is earning 30 trillion won from trade with Korea every year. Ali added an additional explanation. Among Korea's trading partners, Japan has the largest trade deficit. For reference, the second is Saudi Arabia, because they buy oil. The streets of Korea are overflowing with Japanese shops and Japanese cars. Most famous Japanese brands and products are in Korea. Sometimes when I go out to Hongdae or Gangnam, I get confused whether this is Korea or Japan. On the other hand, Korea doesn't sell much to Japan. Japan is such a special market that the word Galapagos comes out. TVs and home appliances of Samsung Electronics and CL Electronics, which have been recognized worldwide for their technology, hardly sell in Japan, and Unsung Motors withdrew because it could not withstand the sluggish sales. Hyunju Nuna said while drinking coffee. Consumer goods are just the tip of the iceberg. The problem is machinery and materials and parts. The root cause of the trade deficit with Japan lies in the structural problems of our industry. Most of the key materials and parts for export-oriented industries such as industrial equipment and precision machinery are made in Japan. Korea imports parts from Japan, makes finished products and exports them to the US and China. In this way, the trade with Japan is in the red and the US and China are in the surplus. Then what did Prime Minister Okazaki say? It's just shouting. There was virtually no damage to the real financial market. Everyone seems to be taking Prime Minister Okazaki's words as a mere apology, said Ellie. Yes. The other side will also know that compensation is practically impossible. I think I will raise the approval rating by shouting moderately against Korea. If sanctions are imposed on trade with Korea, problems arise not only for Korean companies, but also for Japanese companies that export. This is just a show to increase approval ratings. Then what should we do? At Taegyu's question, Hyunju's older sister shook her head. I don't know what to do or what to do. I have no idea what to do over there either. It will be quiet after a while. I crossed my arms and thought for a moment. Raising approval ratings by beating South Korea is nothing short of a tradition in Japanese politics. If the approval ratings drop later, won't you stumble again? There is another problem. OTK Games and Facit have already entered Japan, and Karas and M-Pizza should also be considered in the future. If we just let it go this time, wouldn't the same thing happen in the future? Sometimes I think they will whistle for 2 trillion yen back. Taejayu said. What if the assets of OTK companies' subsidiaries are seized later in Japan? As OTK company is an American company, if you have an idea, you won't be able to do it. Did those who thought like that bomb Pearl Harbor? I heard it and it is. Originally, Japanese girls are strong against the weak and weak against the strong. If you show weakness from this side, you'll get even more pissed later. This is also correct. After thinking about it, I said cautiously. If Japan wants to make me an enemy, why don't you do what it wants? Hyunju Nuna asked when she saw my expression. What are you going to do? After a while, a press conference was held at OTK Company. Again, a lot of domestic and foreign media gathered. On the spot, I calmly expressed my position. In this case, the Japanese government's fault for driving Nishida Securities to operate a pension fund and operating an outdated financial system due to political and economic cooperation is very much at fault. The Japanese Prime Minister has already ruled that the Japanese Supreme Court does not need compensation. Keeping demanding compensation and apology is an act of denying that Japan is a country ruled by law. At my words, the entire conference hall roared. After a while, a reporter shouted, "Didn't the Korean government say that it would seize assets if it didn't compensate Japanese companies for their judgment on forced labor? So is that also wrong?" I said calmly, "That's because the Korean Supreme Court decided that way. I do not pay compensation according to the judgment of the Supreme Court of Japan to the last, and Japanese companies should make compensation according to the judgment of the Supreme Court of Korea. It is wrong to hold on to this without compensating for it." I stopped the question from continuing with my hand. Then he looked at the camera and said, "At the time of the Sino-Japanese War, Japan counterfeited 4 billion yuan of Chinese money and scattered it everywhere to ruin the Chinese economy. As a result, the Chinese people suffered from extreme hunger. In addition, it was not enough to empty the safe by transferring the 4.7 billion yen left in the Chosen Bank to the Tokyo branch just before the collapse. And it was not enough to print billions of yen at random, causing inflation and ruining the Korean economy. Has Japan ever apologized and compensated for such harm to other countries' financial systems? Before demanding an apology and compensation from me, the Japanese government should first bow its head and apologize for the numerous financial crimes committed in Korea and China and seek compensation. Then I'll take a look at it too. That is all. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs was stunned by Kang Jin-hoo's announcement. Korea has always been surrounded by the interests of great powers. Therefore, balancing through diplomacy was directly related to the survival of the country. However, it is not an exaggeration to say that recent Korean diplomacy is being done by Kang Jin-hoo. When I went to the United States and Big One came, the Korea-US alliance was almost broken because of the uproar. But when Big One came, it became an unparalleled blood alliance. Even now, if you look at Russia, most Americans chose Korea as the most friendly country. The relationship with Japan deteriorated as the relationship with China entered a cooling phase and trade retaliation by touching Zhou Ti over the technology leak problem, and taking huge profits from an order mistake at Nishida Securities. Under this circumstance, he freely visited Russia and invested in the progressive nuclear reactor project, arousing negative public opinion on the current government's energy policy. In principle, when businessmen cooperate with or invest in foreign companies, they should consult closely with the government in consideration of the impact it will have on diplomacy. However, there was no such thing as Jin-hoo Kang. He always made his own decisions and made his own announcements. Of course, if we had discussed it in advance, the government would have taken care of the things that could be helpful and would not have allowed them to be harmful. Unlike China, which returned to thawing mode after a visit to China after the earthquake, relations with Japan were deteriorating. This was not just because of the earthquake, but it was a problem caused by the overlap of Japan's early general election and the seizure of property by Japanese companies in Korea following the judgment on compensation for forced labor. The reaction to Prime Minister Okazaki's official statement was also generally explosive. Knowing the background of the remarks well, the Korean government did not take a particular position, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was planning to manage it under the water and resolve it well through negotiations. However, Jin-hoo Kang stepped forward and completely overturned the board. Those gathered at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are the elite of the elite who have passed the diplomat candidate exam. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is famous for its power among other government ministries. But now he was busy rectifying what Jin-hoo Kang had done. Calls came from all over the place like crazy, and the staff were sweating hard to answer the calls and explain the countermeasures. Foreign Minister Kim Sung-cheol looked like he was about to cry when he saw Kang Jin-hoo appearing on TV. "Why are you doing this to us?" After the earthquake, she still revealed that there was no apology and no compensation, casting Nishida Securities' order mistake as a corruption in Japan's political economy. Request for apology and compensation for Japanese financial crimes during the invasion of East Asia. Liberal People's Party expresses great concern about Kang Jin-hoo's remarks. What will the Japanese government's response be? After the strong earthquake, it was quiet for a while, then it started again. But did that really happen? These bastards didn't even have enough to eat like a colony, they pooped until the end. You should know that Japanese girls are meticulous. The Korean financial system was completely ruined by inflation due to what Japan did. Why aren't these things taught in textbooks? The Chinese media also published Kang Jin-hoo's remarks as major news, and public opinion in China was boiling. Many people suffered from the Japanese invasion of the continent. Korea is a brother who fought with China, but Japan is our enemy. Do not use Japanese products. Apologize and compensate Japan even now. Let's get Dao back even by force. After Kang Jin-hoo's announcement came out, the Japanese archipelago was turned upside down. Prime Minister Okazaki and the LDP were bewildered. I tried to beat him moderately, but Jin-hoo Kang reacted and grew his job. As OTK company didn't do anything well, I thought it would avoid comments or rebuttals, but I'm going to hit it head-on. Moreover, it also brought up the financial crimes of Japan during the invasion of East Asia in the past. This was a fact that even the Japanese were not aware of. The president of the Japan Innovation Association, Kato Nakamura, shouted in anger. Why do you say such a thing? Because you look at Japan so ridiculously. Is this the kind of strong Japan that Prime Minister Okazaki said? If we do not respond strongly this time, we will resolve to have no confidence in the cabinet. As the offensive continues from inside and outside, there is no other way. Prime Minister Okazaki appeared in front of reporters. On behalf of the Japanese people, I can't contain my anger at Kang Jin-hoo's remarks. I think this is a provocation against Japan. I will never let this happen, and I will definitely hold Korea accountable. While we will strongly protest to the Korean government and OTK company, we will take retaliatory measures such as transaction and financial sanctions against Korean companies until an official apology is issued. After the press conference, I spoke to Russian President Vysotsky. He spoke in a loud voice and the interpreter spoke right away. You did a good job in Japan. Watching the press conference, my stomach was cool. But is it really okay? I made a bone joke. If I said something like this, should Japan start a war? But a few days ago, a member of the House of Representatives in Japan spoke remarkably in the Kuril Islands. President Vysotsky said in an angry voice, "Is that bullshit?" On a visit to the Kuril Islands, a Japanese member of the House of Representatives shouted that the 4 northern provinces should be reclaimed even if they wage war with Russia. It's not the first time Japanese politicians have made similar remarks about Dokdo, but Japan's response was completely different. The lawmaker immediately bowed his head and apologized for being drunk and talking nonsense, and the National Assembly from both the opposition and the ruling party lashed out at him and offered to expel him from his office. Even a tiger without teeth is a tiger. Even if Japan is far ahead economically, Russia remains the most powerful country in the military and energy fields. The situation will be different from Korea, which they consider to be blissful. However, the remarks had already spread around the world, and the Russian government was considering a response. In a situation where Japan takes action first, I have no intention of growing my business. With a little help from the president, we will keep Japan from even talking about the Kuril Islands for a while. President Vysotsky expressed interest in my words. How? I do not know. If you trust me, I will perform like General Zhukov. General Georgy Zhukov, a famous Soviet commander, defeated the Japanese Guangdong Army in the Battle of Hyeonyeonggol and broke Japan's will to invade the Soviet Union. A statue of him on horseback still stands in Moscow's Red Square. I explained the plan and President Vysotsky burst into laughter. Haha, that would be fun. Do whatever you want to do. After Prime Minister Okazaki's announcement, the Japanese right wing began to gather. Protests against Korea were held in various places, and claims over Dokdo intensified. Japan's sanctions immediately resulted in tangible economic losses. The stock prices of companies that are highly dependent on Japan for trading have plummeted, and the exchange rate has soared. Japanese companies are also expected to suffer from export disruptions, and their stock prices have fallen slightly after the announcement of sanctions. On the other hand, the approval ratings of the Japan Innovation Association, the LDP, and Prime Minister Okazaki rose sharply. While the Korean government did not take any particular position, the opposition party moved first. The Liberal People's Party expressed serious concerns, and leader Yoon Nak-young stepped forward and attacked the government. The Ha Chong-min government is unnecessarily irritating Japan. The Hyo Chong-min administration, which is destroying Korea-Japan relations, must reflect. Nak-young's pro-Japanese behavior has been famous since her first election as a member of the National Assembly. She attended a commemorative party for the founding of the Self-Defense Forces, and insisted that the Korean government make efforts for compensation during the Nishida securities crisis. But this time it was one more drink. If Japan restricts exports, all Korean companies will die and the Korean economy will collapse. The government should fully understand Japan's position and take measures to normalize relations. public opinion was divided. Is that the National Party representative or the LDP spokesperson? As I said, has Japan ever saved Korea? This is all because of Hyo Chong-min. The Hyo Chong-min government ruined Korea-Japan relations. The relationship was ruined over there, so why should we take measures? The pro-North Korean leftist should be put in a cell after the earthquake. I think you should call me Yun Kazaki, not Yun Nak-young. Isn't it just indigenous? Who the hell elected him as the party leader? No, you elected the conservative opposition. What kind of pro-Japanese things are you doing? Still, I don't know if you have any thoughts. Only the government is oblivious to Kong Jin-hu. If it's remuneration, just remunerate as if it's remuneration, and please do it moderately. So Yun Nak-young didn't say anything wrong, and I don't know why. Don't you know that Korean companies depend on Japan for key parts? Let it go now. The economy is going to crash and everyone will be resentful after the earthquake with the government. Right. The only way for Korea to live is cooperation with Japan. Japan is a grateful country. Thank you, always happy face. I support you, Nak-young Yun. Take you said while watching the news. Will all Korean companies go bankrupt if Japan sanctioned them? There is no unilateral benefit relationship in international trade. We buy bread not because of the baker's mercy but because he seeks profit. Similarly, the reason Japanese companies exported materials and parts to Korea was not to save Korean companies, but because it was profitable. If Korean companies really couldn't live without Japan, they would have gotten ridiculously high prices in the first place. Trade is done because both sides benefit. It is impossible to achieve a 100% equalization of the balance of trade. When one side sees a profit, the other side tends to see a deficit. However, if the one who sees the loss is one-sided, that is not the case. If you have imported a product that costs 100,000 won to make yourself at 50,000 won, you are actually making a profit of 50,000 won. It is the Korean companies that will be hit immediately by the sanctions, but the loss of Japanese companies will increase as time goes by. This is a battle of who can bear the more losses. The remarks of the Japan Innovation Society and the right wing grew stronger and stronger. The slogans for the recovery of Takashima also flowed out of nowhere. In the current international order, it is virtually impossible to deprive another country of the territory it occupies. Even if Korea's national power declines so much that Japan can eat Dokdo, it is difficult to do so in reality. This is because the loss from Japan's point of view is much greater than the gain from taking Dokdo. Of course, it is difficult to completely rule out such a possibility, so you must thoroughly prepare for provocations. The military exists to make the impossible happen. Actually, from the Japanese point of view, Dokdo is just one of several territorial disputes. To raise the approval rating, it is more effective to highlight the Senkaku Islands and Kuril Islands issues rather than Dokdo. But why do you only touch Dokdo every day? Would you like to touch China and Russia? China and Russia are gangster countries that the whole world is afraid of except the United States. It's like a neighborhood bastard who can't speak properly to the gangsters, but only grabs the neck of the powerless commoners and shakes them. Everyone loves justice, but relations between nations are driven by power, not justice. The war criminal countries that started the World War and invaded neighboring countries are still doing well, and the victims of colonial rule are still groaning in pain. Some countries are even asking for aid from the aggressors that ruled them. If Korea hadn't achieved economic growth, it would still be extending its hands to Japan. A country or a company can shout loudly if they have the power, and if they don't have the power they will suffer. Taekyu crossed his arms and said, "That's what the powerless sorrow is." Realistically, it is impossible for Korea to surpass Japan's economic power. This is because even if Korea grows more and its per capita GDP becomes the same as that of Japan, the population will more than double. Therefore, in general, Japan has always had a higher national power than Korea. For the economic power to reverse, Korea's per capita GDP must exceed 0.000, or conversely, Japan's per capita GDP must fall below 0.000, which is difficult in reality. However, At least it shouldn't look sloppy. Even if you tell them clearly that there is no benefit in touching them, Japan's attitude will be very different from what it is now. Less than a day after Prime Minister Okazaki announced the sanctions, Minister of Foreign Affairs Kim Song-cheol came to the company. Although it may seem like a trivial thing to meet and keep in touch with the heads of state these days, it is not uncommon for the Minister of Foreign Affairs to visit businessmen like this. Nice to meet you, Seo Kong-jin-hu. I am Kim Song-cheol, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is one of the most important positions in the government. His career is also brilliant. He received his PhD from Yale University and worked at the United Nations. Although there are suspicions that his nephew was illegally admitted to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs special appointment. Well, this shouldn't be important. Minister Kim Song-cheol said with a smile. I also graduated from the Department of Business Administration at Korea University. So I always thought of it as a relationship with Seo Kong-jin-hu. Take-you, who was next to me, tapped my shoulder. I wish you there are plenty of seniors in the political and business worlds. Why are there so many people from Korea University in the world? Perhaps it was taken as a meaning not to promote the academic world for nothing. Minister Kim Song-cheol gave a slightly embarrassed expression. By the way, I also don't like hack-related, jiyeon and blood-related. We sat in the meeting room. What did you come here for? I would like to hear the opinions of Seo Kong-jin-hu on Korea-Japan relations. Is my opinion important to government affairs? You are aware that there are several issues between Korea and Japan right now. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs is discussing the future direction by synthesizing various opinions from various fields. I don't know what you want to say. The language of politicians and the language of diplomats are different. Since even a small thing can cause misunderstandings and accusations in other countries, there is a tendency to pay attention to each word and toe, and to go over with blunt words. Don't talk back, speak directly. There will be no leaks here. At my words, Minister Kim Song-cheol put on a determined expression. To be honest, the government's position is very difficult. It's not just an embarrassment. The Blue House and all ministries are in a state of emergency. And all the arrows of criticism are pouring down to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Relations with Japan have now gone beyond cooling and are heading towards catastrophe. Why the hell do you keep doing this? It's crazy. Taeyong said in a low voice. It's also too honest. Seems that I have accumulated a lot during that time. Well, it's not that I don't understand. I'm a little different from other entrepreneurs who faithfully follow government policies. I asked him, what is the government's position on the judgment on compensation for forced labor? During the Japanese colonial period, Japanese companies forced Koreans to work and did not pay them properly. At that time, the victims sued for damage compensation and overdue wages, but ultimately lost in Japan. The victims filed a lawsuit again in the Korean court. The Park Si-hyung government placed great importance on Korea-Japan relations, so pressured the judiciary to delay the decision. In the meantime, 3 out of 4 victims who filed the lawsuit died from disease and old age. If it had been delayed, all of the plaintiffs would have died. However, the trial resumed after the change of government, and the Korean Supreme Court ruled that Japanese companies should pay 100 million won per person. It is difficult to deny the fact that forced labor took place. Therefore, Japan put forward the logic that compensation had already been completed in accordance with the Korea-Japan Claims Agreement. Korea is in the position that it does not include the issue of individual claims. It is our position that we must follow the principles of the judgment of the judiciary. In fact, the amount itself is not a big issue. How much is that money originally? The company was willing to pay compensation. However, the Japanese government issued a directive not to pay compensation, and decided not to pay compensation in accordance with the policy of the home government. As a result, Korea began to seize property in Korea in accordance with the Supreme Court's ruling, and Japan is protesting against this. It seems that Japan is planning to take him to the arbitration committee. I did not respond, but I am considering that as well. The arbitration committee is a system in which one person from Korea and Japan and one person from a third country are selected for mediation. This may sound fair at first glance, but there is one problem with this. Japan is the world's third largest economy, and through this, it is exerting influence around the world. Even if you are a third person, if there is a strong person and a weak person, who will you side with? Japan is also very grievous about this issue. If you make a mistake, it could lead to an acknowledgement of various war crimes, including forced labor. Japan wants to erase its image as a war criminal country from the international community. Therefore, when the issue of comfort women and forced labor arises, it is strongly opposed. There were differences of opinion over the solution, but we were negotiating with each other behind the scenes. You mean I broke the plate? After hesitating for a moment, Minister Kim Song-cheol nodded his head as if sighing. That's right. Read more at wuxiax.com. I woke up on purpose. He looked at me with a puzzled expression. Are you saying that even though you knew it? The breach of the Comfort Women Agreement, the judgment on compensation for forced labor, and even the Nishida Securities incident. Japan is using these as a way to increase approval ratings within their own country. If compensation is obtained through seizure, Japan will maintain the stance that Korea forcibly ripped it off, not that they paid compensation. And if bored, won't Korea push Korea? An apology must be the premise for compensation, otherwise it is meaningless. When the two countries first announced the Comfort Women Agreement, there were many opinions that it was good. But what is this? After receiving 1 billion yen, Japan's attitude changed. He continued to deny the fact of the forced deportation of comfort women and war crimes, and pressured the South Korean government to implement the agreement by removing the statue of the girl. It's like shouting out that the person who committed the crime gave you money. Eventually, the agreement was broken and Korea-Japan relations were worse than before the agreement was reached. In this issue of compensation for forced labor, there is no law preventing a similar situation from repeating itself. So it would be better to tie a knot and move on. It's not as easy as it sounds. The government's position right now is quite difficult. The economy is booming, the opposition is on the offensive. People are also very concerned. Taejayu said. The approval rating has been dropping. He couldn't deny that and put on a bitter expression. Even if it is difficult right now, if the results are good, everything is good. Wouldn't it be a disappointment if this was done well? Did you think there was a card that could turn the situation around? Minister Kim Song-cheol asked cautiously with his eyes shining. In your opinion, what would the government want the government to do? If the Korean government proceeds with the confiscation of assets, the relationship with Japan will deteriorate to the worst. However, Japan cannot stand still in a situation where it strikes a player first. If it was difficult for you to make a decision, would you have come to me? I said it like it was natural. You just have to follow the rules. This means proceeding with the foreclosure of assets. Then what about our relationship with Japan? In one way or another, Japan is an important partner of South Korea both economically and security-wise. I can't keep this cold state forever. Of course you have to solve it. I added a word. In the first place, the person who is regretful tends to bow their head first. I asked Chairman Im Jin-yong to collect the businessmen who were affected by the Japanese sanctions. Not only the FKI, which is a representative management organization, but also the Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Korea International Trade Association, the Korea Federation of Small and Medium Businesses, and the Korea Employers Federation, etc. Some even returned home in haste from abroad. That is why we are taking this situation seriously. The location was decided at the FKI Hall. Although it was created for Korea's economic growth and corporate development, it is a fact that everyone knows that the Federation of Korean Industries is an organization that represents the interests of the chaebols. The first FKI hall I visited was large and beautiful. What the hell are you doing here to make the building this big? Following the guidance of the staff, I entered the conference hall. Inside, people were already crowded. I've met businessmen from time to time, but this is the first time I've had such a large-scale meeting. It's amazing that so many of the leading businessmen have gathered at my word. Do you think the principal who was collecting useless morning inquiries and collecting them in the children's playground felt like this? The combined market cap of the companies gathered here is more than the GDP of any country. In front sat the CEOs of large corporations, who frequently showed their faces in the news. Among them, the presidents in and out of the prosecutor's office in wheelchairs were also seen. And the CEOs of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, were seated behind them. Although they are not comparable in size to large enterprises, SMEs are responsible for a significant proportion of manufacturing employment. If these companies go out of business, the economy of the working class will be shaken from the root. As it was a conversation between businessmen, the media and politicians did not invite them separately. The atmosphere was not very good. Even without speaking directly, I could see that there was a lot of dissatisfaction with me. Although I worked, the OTK company suffered little damage. Although the number of Fassalt and Lost Fantasy subscribers decreased slightly due to worsening public opinion in Japan, it is insignificant in overall view. There were no direct sanctions. Faceit is originally an American company, and OTK Games has recently moved its headquarters to the United States. You don't want to touch Ronald's heart by accidentally touching it. On the other hand, from large corporations to small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, an overall shock struck the Korean economy. In particular, companies that import core materials, parts, and machines from Japan have been hit hard. I stood on the podium and spoke into the microphone. Hello, this is Jin Ho Kong. Thank you for gathering like this here. Let's skip all formalities and get straight to the point. I think Japan's sanctions will cause great harm and suffering to everyone. We need to understand the situation and come up with countermeasures, so please speak frankly without looking at anyone. First, the microphone went to the small business owners. At first he hesitated, noticing, but when one or two people started talking first, the clay poured out. It happened so suddenly we didn't have time to stock up. There will be a disruption in the delivery schedule right now. Large companies may have enough funds and resources to survive, but small and medium-sized businesses like us are feeling the risk of going out of business. After Chinese retaliation, Japanese retaliation is also attacked, so it tastes like death. Every day is like a piece of thin ice. The employees are very worried that the company is closing because of this, and the work efficiency is also declining. Although there are differences between companies and industries, they are serious. Now that we have fully grasped the situation, it is time to take action. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy and the Ministry of SMEs and Startups are also taking measures. But as always, it takes time for the government to move. I looked around the managers and said, small and medium-sized enterprises are the root and support of Korean industry. First of all, I hope that large corporations, including OTK Company, will contribute funds to support SMEs and partners in difficulties. At my words, the faces of the heads of small and medium-sized enterprises brightened. The faces of the CEOs of large corporations were just that. Many of you in this room must have been through a similar situation in the past. Some older bosses noticed what I was talking about. Imports of Japanese-made materials and parts have been blocked in the past. This is the IMF crisis. As it is now, the Korean economy takes the form of processing trade in which raw materials, precision machinery and core parts are imported, then assembled, processed and sold. However, due to the outbreak of the foreign exchange crisis, the seeds of the dollar in the government coffers dried up, and the exchange rate soared day by day. The price of imported materials and parts tripled due to the collapse of the won. Numerous companies went bankrupt, and in order to survive, they had to find a way to survive. The only way to find out is through technology development. Since they had no money to buy parts from abroad, they had no choice but to make them in Korea. It succeeded in localizing numerous core parts, and the technologies developed at this time became the driving force for economic recovery and corporate growth. Then why didn't you do it before then? Of course it's cheaper to buy. And it is the same now. Technology development takes time and costs a lot of money. Korean companies also need to develop their own technologies. How long are you going to depend on foreign countries for key parts? The world is already global and closely connected. It is neither possible nor inefficient to have to make all the parts in-house. Even though the domestic market is small and it is inevitable to live on trade, it is a serious problem that the country is too dependent on imports and exports with Japan, China, and the United States. Even a slight breeze blows the entire economy. The need to diversify imports and exports has been around for a long time, but everyone was left behind and faced serious difficulties when Japan imposed sanctions. If it had been able to achieve some degree of self-sufficiency in this area, Japan would not have been able to take such sanctions. It's good to compete with each other, but now is the time to collaborate. If companies in the same industry come together and jointly develop technology, the cost and time can be greatly reduced. Chairman Im Jin-yong said. Technology development may be effective in the long run, but it is not effective right now. If sanctions on the Japanese side are not lifted, it will be difficult to obtain key materials and parts for the next several years. Managers of other large corporations also said a word at a time. We are urgently contacting American and European companies to replace Japanese-made parts, but it is questionable whether the negotiation will respond properly in a situation where the deal is cut off. The unit price is not right. There are a lot of companies out there who give you outrageous quotes with the guts. If you negotiate while maintaining the existing customers, you can compete with each other on the delivery price, but you are trying to get the delivery unit price high as you know that this is a disappointing position. Have thoughts on that too. I want individual companies to respond jointly rather than negotiating with each other. I will take responsibility. I will mobilize all the cards that OTK company can use, such as self-driving electric vehicles, batteries and TWRs, to support negotiations with Korean companies. A murmur spread throughout the conference hall. I looked around the managers and said, I would like to create a task force for joint development and joint negotiations at this place. Those of you who want to join us, please do not hesitate to raise your hand. Not a single one of the people gathered at my place raised their hands. Not to mention Japan, Korea is also a world-renowned economic powerhouse. As the conflict between the two intensified, the whole world was interested. Foreign media treated it as major news and sent out breaking news every day. Most of the experts were in the mood to support the Japanese side. The reason is, of course, that Korea relies on Japan for core materials and parts, and the Japanese economy is larger. If both sides fight, the damage to Korea will inevitably be greater. The reporters gathered at the FKI hall talked about each other. Reporter Kim, what do you think the outcome of this meeting will be? Why don't you appeal the difficulties and urge the Korean government to take measures? At least they will ask the Japanese government to ease the sanctions. Actually, the business interests of the management group come first. After a while, after the meeting was over, the chairman of the FKI announced the results of the meeting in front of reporters. Large corporations have decided to donate emergency funds to support small and medium-sized businesses in difficulties. In addition, we plan to reduce our dependence on Japanese materials and parts in the future by creating a development team for joint development of core parts and a response team for joint negotiations. Reporters were surprised when a completely different measure came out than expected. But this was only the beginning. OTK company distributed press releases to the inside and outside media, and breaking news immediately poured in. Breaking news. OTK company announces total suspension of OTK battery supply to Japanese electronics companies. Seosung SB. Notice of cancellation of OTK battery supply contract. OTK company excludes Japanese companies from participating in Rosatom's TWR development and construction. future technical cooperation is also prohibited. Junho Kong, I have no intention of backing down until the Japanese government apologizes and compensates. The OTK battery developed by Professor Haman Kim revolutionized not only automobiles, but also the electronics and energy industries. TS Company makes large batteries for automobiles, and Seosong SB makes small batteries for electronic devices. It was first installed in Susong Electronics' high-end smartphones, tablets and laptops. Using the OTK battery has more than doubled, but the charging time has been shortened. The response from consumers has been very positive, and demand has increased significantly. Susong Electronics took over and the remaining amount was supplied to American companies preferentially. This included both partners and competitors of Susong Electronics such as NPL, MS and Gubel. The reason why we rushed to the US, where there are many competitors, is because if new technologies deteriorate the competitiveness of the US industry, the US cannot stand still. So large-sized automobile batteries are also supplied to GM and Ford first. The OTK company and Susong Group attributed all of this to President Ronald, who gave his thumbs up, praising the two companies in front of supporters. Read more at wuxiax.com. Seosong SB expanded its plant and increased production, and exported it to Japan, China, and Europe. But suddenly, a document was sent to a Japanese electronics company to cancel all supply contracts. If either party unilaterally cancels the contract, compensation for damages or penalties will occur. However, in the case of OTK batteries, the disappointment was the receiving side, not the supplying side, so the penalty was not much and Seosong SB was willing to ask for it. Representatives from Sony, Toshiba and Canon came to the Susong Group headquarters. They fiercely protested to Chairman Im Jin-young at the seat. How could this be? It's been decades since I've done business with Seosong Group. If the contract is unilaterally broken like this, which company will do business with Susong Group? If the supply contract was cancelled, both sides suffered losses, but it was not a big problem for Seosong SB. This is because there are not one or two places waiting in line to receive the quantity. Again, as soon as the rumors spread that the contract with a Japanese company was cancelled, American and European companies rushed to place orders. In fact, the problem is the image of unilaterally breaking the contract rather than monetary loss such as a penalty. Therefore, Chairman Im Jin-young took a deep breath and blamed it all after Kang Jin-young. CO Kang Jin-who banned the export of OTK batteries to Japan, but what should we do? As you know, Seosong SB only produces under a license from OTK company. Seeing that CO Kang Jin-who joined the TF, didn't Seosong Group agree? Chairman Im Jin-young jumped in embarrassment. Agree? We are the ones who suffer the most right now. The batteries they made are not even sent to Japan, so they are piled up in warehouses and now they have to pay a penalty. Right now, because of CO Kang Jin-who, our side is losing a lot of money. Then Seosong Group should protest to OTK company. Chairman Im Jin-young tapped his chest as if frustrated. I don't know if it was in the past, but now I don't even pretend to listen to me. We are also in a position to be drawn to the words of Representative Kang Jin-who. Not just me but all companies. Which Korean companies can compete with OTK company right now? I will be very mad. Chairman Lim Jin-young vehemently criticized Kang Jin-who with Japanese officials as if he and the Seosong Group were also victims. It is an unavoidable situation, but since it is our responsibility, we will immediately pay the penalty for breaking the contract. The Japanese officials came to accuse them and then they got stuck. The penalty is fine, so please resume delivery. Are you not familiar with the current situation in the Japanese electronics industry? Without OTK batteries, the performance of Japanese electronic devices will inevitably lag behind. Chairman, please talk to CO Kang Jin-who. The government is doing something. What's wrong with us? I would like to ask you a favor, thinking about your business relationship. Chairman Im Jin-young nodded his head. That is correct. Aren't you and I'm not in a position where we're avoiding the decisions we make at our own discretion? I will do my best to persuade CEO Kang Jin-hu. I hope you all do your best to help the Japanese government ease the sanctions. After Professor Petrov's research team succeeded in testing the TWR, Russia actively promoted it and attracted partners. It was intended to dominate the nuclear power plant and energy markets in the future with the TWR as a weapon. The country that responded most actively to this was Japan. After the Fukushima disaster, Japan stopped all nuclear power plants in operation and pushed for nuclear phase-out. But after Prime Minister Okazaki came to power, it turned to building nuclear power plants by operating them again. Although it is a realistically unavoidable choice, the Japanese people's fear and anxiety about nuclear power still persisted, and public opinion against it was strong. Under such circumstances, if a safer and more efficient nuclear power plant could be built, there was no reason to hesitate. Japan quickly joined the TWR camp. The calculation was that Japanese companies would take charge of the construction and operation of the nuclear power plant even if it bought the core technology. As Japan is a country with excellent nuclear technology, Russia was happy to join it as an important partner. But suddenly, the Russian side unilaterally notified that it would cut off business with Japanese nuclear power plants. Japanese officials strongly protested. This is a breach of contract. President Trusova Rosatom blamed all of this on the earthquake. CEO Kang Jin-hu is against it, so we can't help it. No, OTK company's stake is only 36%, isn't it? All decisions are made by the Russian government and Rosatom. I don't know about that, and we are in a difficult position. Excluding Japanese companies is also a blow for Russia. This is because it is equivalent to giving up the golden opportunity to enter the Japanese nuclear power plant market. However, although both were disappointing, it was clear which one would be more disappointing. Then please try to persuade the Russian side. We want to do that too, but the domestic public opinion is not very good now because of what happened the other day. Is this a thing of the past? Didn't your politician declare war on Russia? No, a declaration of war. What is that? Anyway, what do you do when Kang Jin-hu says he can't be president? As you know, severing ties with Japan is a loss for us as well. Trusova said as if it were a last resort. If you want to argue, go to CEO Kang Jin-hu instead of us and argue. The Russian media focused on the remarks of the Japanese House of Representatives last month, saying, even if we go to war, we must reclaim the 4 northern provinces. President Vysotsky called it a provocation, and anti-Japanese sentiment simmered in Russia. Japan could not contain its embarrassment. At the time of the remark, the atmosphere was moderately shifted to Japan's quick apology, but suddenly it became a problem and fell. Besides, it wasn't just a matter of putting a cover on words. Japan has even announced a detailed plan to strengthen its military force in the 4 northern provinces, which it claims sovereignty over, and to suspend Japanese visa-free entry. Thanks to his strong response to territorial disputes, President Vysotsky's domestic approval rating has risen significantly. The Japanese foreign minister also stepped forward when the TWR cooperation was suspended and the Japanese-Japanese relations showed signs of worsening due to overlapping remarks by the House of Representatives about war. Foreign Minister Okamoto met with the Russian foreign minister. I've already apologized several times, and didn't the member in question step down and resign? Foreign Minister Pimenov shook his head. That is not enough. We need a direct apology from the Japanese Prime Minister and a promise to prevent recurrence. As you know, the basic position of the Japanese government is that the 4 northern provinces are Japanese territory. This remark also came out of the process of defending such a position. If the Prime Minister came forward and apologized, it could be seen as Japan's renunciation of territorial claims, which was practically impossible. Like the Republic of Karelia, the Karels are Russian territory. Originally a Finnish territory, Karelia was handed over to the Soviet Union during the Winter War. As it remains an autonomous Republic of Russia even today, it means that the Kuril Islands occupied by Russia after the victory in World War II are also Russian territory. How could this be? When circumstances change, behavior changes. In the meantime, Japan has used economic support and cooperation as a bait to influence Russia. From the point of view of Russia, which was blocked by Western sanctions, Japan's capital was like a rain shower of drought. However, thanks to the development of TWR, Russia has a negotiating card and is seeking to attract foreign investment by taking advantage of OTK companies' advancement. Under these circumstances, Japan's economic influence is bound to diminish. Foreign Minister Okamoto recalled a young Korean man he had met briefly before. It was the first such humiliation since he assumed the position of foreign minister in charge of Japanese diplomacy. Is this also related to CEO Kang Jin-ho? Foreign Minister Paimanov neither affirmed nor denied that statement. I look forward to sincere measures from the Japanese side. Kang Jin-ho's remarks became reality one by one. Following the Japanese embargo on OTK batteries, news came that Japanese companies were excluded from TWR construction. It was a series of unbelievable things that one person did. Following the electronics industry and nuclear power industry, the automobile industry is also in crisis. This is because the OTK battery embargo also applies to Japanese automakers. Japanese cars have excellent performance, durability, and reasonable prices. It was evaluated as a leader in the field of future cars and eco-friendly cars. Toyota's hybrid car, the Prius, and Nissan's electric car, the Leaf, are representative examples. But this was already a story many years ago. The Japanese automobile industry has been unable to keep up with the recent changes in the automobile industry. With the development of OTK batteries, electric vehicles have broken through the 1,000-kilometer wall, but Japanese electric vehicles are still at around 300 kilometers. To overcome this situation, the Japanese government gathered automakers, electronics companies, and battery companies to form Auto Alliance, and started technology standardization and joint development, but there was no progress in autonomous driving technology development, and the Japanese battery market share fell day by day. Toyota, who should take the lead role, was caught up in a dispute over management rights due to an order mistake at Nishida Securities, and Zhou Cha tried to control Toyota's Chinese business. While the Japanese auto industry was wasting time, Karas entered into technical alliances with GM, Ford, and Unsung Motors and poured self-driving electric vehicles into the market. A growing sense of crisis that they might be isolated from the global market, some companies showed signs of leaving Auto Alliance and took individual actions. At the same time, CL Chemical and SSK Innovation started production of OTK batteries for automobiles. The most important thing in an internal combustion engine is the engine. On the other hand, the most important thing in electric vehicles is the battery, not the performance of the motor. Therefore, in order to make an electric vehicle that is globally recognized, OTK batteries were essential. Honda and Nissan were contacting each other to place an order, but negotiations were completely halted at the words of Jin-ho Kang. The damage didn't stop with automakers. Japanese auto parts makers are globally recognized for their technological prowess, and their parts are exported to all over the world, including Korea and the US. However, rumors began to circulate that the industry was excluding automakers that had a lot of business with Japanese parts makers from supplying OTK batteries. Jin-ho Kang never said anything directly, and I don't know if it's true or not, but automakers all reacted sensitively. From the point of view of Japanese parts makers that were expanding exports to the low yen, they were struck by lightning. The damage has now spread to the entire Japanese automobile industry. The stock prices of automakers such as Toyota and Honda plummeted all at once, and parts makers stumbled all at once. Taikyu muttered with his arms crossed. Japan had a plausible plan, until he was beaten by Kang Jin-ho. When Prime Minister Okazaki first talked about sanctions, few people thought that this situation would last for a long time. This is because they expected that Korea would take a step back and compromise at an appropriate level. But this is what I was talking about when I wasn't there. In Japan and Korea's power games, of course, Japan has an advantage. But what if it was a battle between Japan and OTK Company? Even if the value of OTK Company exceeds $1 trillion, Japan is the world's third largest economy and its annual GDP alone exceeds $4 trillion. If we convert this to an enterprise value, wouldn't it be over $40 trillion? But there is one big difference between the two. That is, I don't have to look out for the shareholders, but the government should look out for the people. Prime Minister Okazaki and the LDP have already struggled with declining approval ratings after the Nishida securities crisis. That's why I put the irrational number of trade sanctions against my counterattack. If Japan's damage starts to materialize, the approval rating will drop even more. Of course, this also suffers damage. However, there are many other markets in the world besides Japan. Even in order to diversify imports and exports, we need to expand our business with Europe. Well, it's not something I came up with, it's an opinion that has been around for a long time. But not everyone did. So this time I decided to. I'm going from Germany. The company is doing well. Buy a present. When we said we were going, they said welcome. Including OTK Company's private planes, Korean businessmen's planes flew toward Europe. Japan was keenly aware of Korea's move. Even when the liberal Kuomintang criticized the government and the South Korean government showed no response, they thought it was going their way. However, when Jin Hu-kong stepped in, things started to go awry. Jin Hu-kong first brought businessmen together. And within a few hours he announced a strategy to develop the technology in the long term and expand business with Europe in the short term. He also restricted OTK battery exports and TWR participation, conversely launching an offensive against Japan. The Japanese government was taken aback by this move. I thought that if Japanese companies stopped supplying materials and parts, the Korean economy would stumble, but if they do it wrong, Japan will be hit even harder. After the strong earthquake, he reached out to Europe using the card he held in his hand. The news that Jin Hu-kong was coming made Europe excited. German Chancellor Meissner cancelled his domestic schedule and hurried to prepare to welcome Korean businessmen, and the heads of other neighboring countries considered traveling to Germany. Now, the strengthening of economic cooperation between Korea and Europe was obvious. Korea will increase imports of European materials and parts, and Europe will increase imports of Korean finished products. Once the supply chain is changed, it becomes difficult to resume supply even if sanctions are lifted later. In addition, Korea and Japan share a significant portion of export items such as home appliances and automobiles. If Korea expands exports to the EU, where will it suffer the most? When the situation became like this, voices of dissatisfaction erupted among Japanese companies. Is Prime Minister Okazaki having an idea or not? The reason the US sanctions China is because it has a trade deficit of over $400 billion. However, Japan is seeing a surplus of 3 trillion yen in Korea. Where else is the trade surplus sanctioning the trade deficit? If this continues, Japanese cars will be completely isolated from the global market. If Korean companies change their parts supply chain to Europe, what is the use of lifting the sanctions later? Why did you bring political issues to economic issues? Did the Japanese government learn nothing even after losing over 2 trillion yen? As the economic damage to Japan was becoming a reality, countermeasures were necessary. The Japan Innovation Association insisted on additional sanctions, but even within the LDP, there was talk of lifting the sanctions immediately and negotiating with South Korea. But if Japan backs down like this, it will only become a laughingstock to the whole world. I needed an opportunity to change my position. Now there is no possibility that Jin Hu-kong will step down. What remains is the response of the Korean government. If the other person puts out their hand first, it will naturally lead to a conversation. By the way, As previously announced, the Korean government began the process of seizure of assets in Japan in response to the judgment of compensation for forced labor. When the seizure procedure for the judgment on compensation for forced labor began, the opinions of the ruling and opposition parties were greatly divided. The government and the New Politics Party took the position that it was a natural execution according to the due process. But the Liberal National Party made it clear that it would lead to the collapse of Korea-Japan relations. There was a fierce debate over this issue in the National Assembly. Ho Yun-nak-young strongly protested. Where is the seizure of such a snatch without consulting the Japanese government? The whole world is watching, aren't you ashamed? Now is not the time of Japanese colonial rule, and the sovereign state enforces the law, so why consult with other countries? No, the blow to our companies is becoming a reality. Are you saying it's okay if businesses go bankrupt and the economy collapses? Even if there are practical problems, it is natural for the Supreme Court to carry out the decision as long as it has been issued. It is absurd for the executive and the legislature to gossip about decisions made by the judiciary. Ho Yun-nak-young shouted as if frustrated. Right now, the government is trying to divide the people into pro-Japanese and anti-Japanese in this way, but you will all remember how the people were very divided after the liberation due to the Anti-Civil Special Committee. Now is the time for everyone to become one. At the words that the committee's activities to punish pro-ethnic actors had divided the people, the impatient new political party lawmakers stood up and shouted at once. Anti-People's Special Committee? Are you saying that now? How the hell do you want to become one? Are you saying that the annexation of Korea and Japan should be done? Controversy escalated and the parliament went into bankruptcy. Japan has been taking a hardline stance on the issue of past history. He has repeatedly stated that there is absolutely no compensation for the judgment of compensation for forced labor. Even though the company said it would pay compensation, the government ordered it not to do so. However, when Korea forced this seizure, a backlash arose and public opinion in Japan was greatly shaken. There was an active boycott of OTK companies' subsidiaries and Korean products. How much more are you trying to rip off Japan? If you keep giving money, it will only make your habit worse. They will rip it off this time and later beg for money as if they had broken the Comfort Women Agreement. All Koreans are thieves. Don't use Korean products, don't go to Korea. Korea did not pay much attention to Japan's boycott. No, do you guys boycott Korean products for what they are buying? Do you use a Korean phone, watch TV, or drive a car? Is there anything to boycott? Do you want to exercise without eating kimchi? Will the OTK company take a hit? Let's be honest. Even if Japan is that damned, how many kids here won't watch Japanese AV? The same, do you think you can leave face it no matter how much you hate Kang Jin-hoo? Hey, so you're not going to watch porn? Hey, people should watch porn and play games for a living. In response, Korean consumers also launched a boycott. However, even Japanese brands often set up joint ventures with domestic companies in the process of advancing into Korea. And all of the people working in the stores are Koreans, and some of the products are produced in countries other than Japan. The influence of the boycott was limited as the world economy was so intricately intertwined. A more direct hit came from tourism. Apart from political issues, the number of Korean tourists has been on the rise, but this time it was a little different. As the Japanese government continued to stimulate anti-Korean sentiment, anti-Korean demonstrations were held in various parts of the city, and Korean tourists, feeling threatened by this, gradually stopped. The bigger problem was China. China's state-run media reported heavily on Kang Jin-hoo's remarks about Japan's financial crimes during the Sino-Japanese War, and some even made a special feature to cover the damage China suffered at the time and the Nanjing massacre. As a result, anti-Japanese sentiment was boiling in China. Japanese travel products disappeared from Chinese travel agency sites, and Chinese companies that were promoting Japanese group tours with hundreds of employees were cancelled or their destinations changed to Korea for some reason. The local governments in Japan, who were excited to welcome a large group of tourists, were in a distraught mood. In addition, Russia continued to question the previous remarks and demanded a direct apology from the Prime Minister. Both China and Russia seemed to take sides after the earthquake. The Japanese government struggled to come up with a countermeasure. The first to impose sanctions on South Korea was close to a warning not to move recklessly. However, Korea ignored it and came out stronger. However, when it comes to fighting with additional sanctions, only Japan is at a loss. If it was originally expected, it would be normal if by now there were screams of death among Korean companies and criticism of the Korean government. However, screams and criticism broke out among Japanese companies. Japanese businessmen were clamoring for why they made the situation like this by touching Jinhu, who was still standing still. They hit South Korea to raise the government's approval rating, but a headwind has blown and the approval rating is declining. The Liberal National Party declared an over-the-counter struggle and held an emergency meeting with businessmen. The idea was to raise public opinion criticizing the government's policy failures by highlighting the companies that are suffering from the deterioration of Korea-Japan relations. However, the business people did not appear in the meeting room. The reason is that Kang Jin-woo first gathered business people and created a task force. In a situation where a solution was already developed and pushed forward, there was no entrepreneur who could stand on the side of the Liberal People's Party and criticize Kang Jin-woo. Regarding this, Seo Yun Nak-young once again made a strange claim. They are afraid that business people will even come to the meeting because they are watching the government, she said. Doesn't this situation prove that this government is a violent and coercive dictatorship? Then she went out to a rally for a conservative group protesting the release of Park Si-hyung, holding a microphone and shouting, "The Ha Chong-min government is unnecessarily stimulating Japan," she said. "We must refrain from driving Japan as a foreign commander. I am concerned that activist politicians are leading our diplomacy toward anti-Japanese unilateralism. Considering the stagnant economic growth rate and the threat of a windy North Korea, now is not the time to quarrel or fight with Japan. It is in our national interest to get along with our neighbors. The remarks I make may inflict pain as if they have hit the bone as they contain the voices of the people, but they must be taken into account." Most of the people responded that it was absurd. It seems to give the people the pain of hitting the bones, not the pain of hitting the bones with the voices of the people. What do you mean when Japan beats you up you sit still, but now that you're fighting back you should get along well? Hey, you said that you shouldn't do bad things when Korea is being beaten up. Shut up. What's wrong with cooperating with Japan? Rep. Nak-young Yun is a true patriot. Sure. I think of myself as Japanese, so it's right to see me as a patriot. Even today indigenous wags are harassing you. What's your relationship with the Kurujima pirates? Are you still arguing that you haven't attended the Self-Defense Forces memorial ceremony? The Self-Defense Forces? From the perspective of Yun Kazaki, he is a proud national army that invaded the Korean peninsula. Even in the conservative press, criticism poured in. Public opinion deteriorated and voices of concern were raised within the party. Yun Nak-young was embarrassed and explained this. It is killing the first opposition party for the media to pick out only these provocative words and attack them. Framing the far-right rhetoric towards the liberal Kuomintang has gone too far. While not reporting much on the radical remarks made by the new political party or President Kang Jin-woo, it can only be seen that there is some intention to pick only the words of our party members and keep them on the main page for a few days. Of course, I will be careful if I make inappropriate remarks. However, as is evident from the number of reports, once I say something, I report biasly on indigenous Waguni and Yonkajani, and portals expand and reproduce articles. This biased framing of far-right rhetoric is based on the media dominated by the new political party and the Blue House, and I think it is a joint work of portals that take notice of Kang Jin-woo. However, the criticism did not subside, but rather reigned, and the Liberal National Party's approval rating plummeted. How do the Liberal Democratic Party approval ratings and the Liberal National Party approval ratings move equally? A big picture of Yun Kazaki that could not only let the LDP's approval ratings drop tt. In a situation where both Russia and China have turned their backs on Japan, only Representative Yun Nak-young thinks of Japan this far. The amazing patriotism of the emperor's subjects. Bonsai charge towards OTK company. Take you, the vice president stayed with the company and I headed to Europe. Fortunately, Ellie was also able to go. Ellie smiled and said, "It's my first time going to Europe together." "I see it so. Not a trip but a business trip. I'm sorry I'm leaving for work. I will definitely go on a trip next time. I promised." On the way to the private plane, I looked at the Golden Gate report. The scale and items of imports and exports of Korea's trading partners were detailed. Again, the share of the US, China and Japan is overwhelmingly high. Japan is the largest importer and China is the largest exporter. For this reason, I am not good at speaking to China, but I am saying everything I want to say to Japan. It's more of a pity for the seller than for the buyer. Trade volume with ASEAN countries continues to increase. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Combined, ASEAN countries have a population of about 650 million and a GDP of $2.8 trillion. It is expected to grow stably in the future as it is growing at a rapid rate of close to 10% every year and the demographic structure is young. I then looked at the data for Europe. At present, Europe is complicated by various issues such as polarization, refugees, terrorism and Brexit. Economic growth rates are also declining. The economic growth rate of Germany and France, which can be said to be the leaders of the EU, barely exceeds 1%. The reason is that it has already grown enough to grow. In addition, aging is serious. If the productive population is small, the economic vitality will inevitably decrease. Ellie smiled and said, "But Europe is Europe. It is the birthplace of Western civilization and the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It was also the site of 2 world wars. Even after the UK is gone, Europe still has the world's largest single market with the US and China." As Ellie and her talked, she naturally became close to her body. I saw Ellie's face. Although she doesn't wear much makeup, she has distinct features and is pretty. This is not a private plane. There is a separate crew room, so it's only the 2 of us in this space. As I gently put my hand on her shoulder and kissed her, Ellie covered her mouth and yawned her. "I'm tired," Eli said as she wiped her tears with her fingers. "I didn't get much sleep because I was coming home after finishing work and taking over." Read more at wuxiax.com. By the way, did you leave work very late yesterday? Due to the nature of investment banking, there are times when business is rushed and sometimes not. When each other is busy with work, we rarely go out on a date. We live in the same house, so we see each other every day. It would take 10 hours to get there. Would you like to lie down and sleep? Is that so? The private plane also has a bedroom. I've tried lying down a few times and it's so soft that I can sleep well. There's also a shower room inside. Ellie got up and headed to the bedroom behind her. She then opened the door and turned her head to look at me. "What's wrong? Are you going to stay there?" "Yes." Ellie made a slightly twisted expression. After a while I realized what it meant. "Ah. Huh. It's already too late." Ellie sticks out her tongue and shuts the door and enters, and I quickly stand up. "Wait." The private plane has arrived in Berlin. A car was waiting in advance at the airport and everyone gathered at the reserved hotel. The official schedule started right from the evening. Originally, they were supposed to meet with business people, but to my surprise, Prime Minister Meissner suggested that they meet first. Prime Minister Meissner came to the dinner and greeted him warmly. "Welcome to Germany, CEO Kang Jin-hu. I was going to visit Korea soon, but you came to me first." Eleanor Regina Meissner. She is a white middle-aged woman who appears to be a seemingly ordinary woman. However, she is the first prime minister from East Germany, German Democratic Republic, since German unification. She has served as prime minister for 15 years, and although she has been in power for a long time, she is far from her dictatorship, and has a centrist and inclusive policy in a far-right Europe. Without her, she said that the EU would have been disbanded sooner or later, and she exerted an overwhelming influence not only in Germany but throughout Europe. I said as she grabbed her outstretched hand. Thank you for your hospitality, Prime Minister. I really wanted to see you. Prime Minister Meisner brought an interpreter who could speak Korean, but he was fluent in English, so there was no need to go through an interpreter. But surprisingly, Ellie greeted her in German. I was a little surprised. Do you speak German? It's just a simple conversation. When I was in college, I had a German friend, so I learned a bit. Are you a man? Ellie poked me on the side and said in a low voice. Please don't talk nonsense in a place like this. You just need to answer, why can't you speak? I chatted with Prime Minister Meisner over a drink. I respect the Prime Minister. It is a great honor to meet you like this. She smiled. I also heard a lot from CEO Kang Jin-hu. You have done some really great things. I was just doing it to make money. If that were the case, we wouldn't have thrown everything away to prevent damage to Big One. Prime Minister Meisner was smiling, but the way he looked at me seemed complicated. Could it be because of Brexit? Brexit is the worst event since the founding of the EU. It didn't happen because of me, but I took advantage of that opportunity to make an astronomical profit. And Germany is a country with a large share of the automobile industry. Benz, BMW, Audi, Volkswagen, Porsche, MAN, etc. In addition to domestic brands, it has acquired Mini, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Lamborghini, etc. and has them as subsidiaries. Korea and Japan are also automobile powerhouses, but Germany has an overwhelming market share in the luxury car market, which costs more than $100,000 per unit. The saying that the car is also a German car is not for nothing. There was a time when it was my dream to drive a Benz. When I was in school, when Ki-hong Senpai drove my dad's car, I just sat at the steering wheel and took pictures. Who would have thought that I would have an automobile company? Unlike American and Korean companies that joined hands with Karis, German automakers proceeded with independent development, just like Japan. However, the gap with Karis in the field of future cars is getting wider and wider. At this rate, there was an atmosphere of concern that auto supremacy might be transferred to the United States. The entire industry was interested in this visit as I could become a competitor or collaborator of German cars. I was having a conversation with Prime Minister Meisner and people were buzzing. I looked at the entrance and saw a white man in a suit walking in. French President Sébastien Blanc. Now in his early 40s, he had a bald forehead, but he looked as good as a movie star. He is a familiar face that we often see on the news. He helped quickly. He says he was originally scheduled to come tomorrow, but the French side offered to come today. Ellie spoke to me in a low voice. There is no way France can stand still and watch Germany do well. Even within the same category of EU, each country has different interests. He first greeted Prime Minister Meisner. The two leaders looked like old friends. In general, relations with neighboring countries are not good. Thailand and Vietnam, Ireland and England, Brazil and Argentina, etc. Originally, mainland Europe was dominated by France, not Germany. Then Germany attacked and that led to 2 world wars. As there have been many struggles in history, Germany and France are as famous as Korea and Japan. However, they are now leading a huge community called the EU by joining hands. It is true that French manufacturing lags behind Germany. However, it turns out that France is also a manufacturing powerhouse. There are 2 giant automobile companies, Renault and Peugeot. The quality is not comparable to that of a German car, and it boasts the largest European aerospace industry represented by Airbus. And there is another area that has another strength: energy. France's EDF is a large and beautiful company comparable to Russia's Rosatom. It accounts for more than 20% of electricity production not only in France but also in Europe. It should be noted that 80% of the electricity produced depends on nuclear power. In nuclear power and nuclear-related technology, France is not behind anywhere else. Not to mention nuclear power plant technology, It has high technological prowess in all areas related to electricity such as power generation, management and transmission. Other than that, there is no need to even talk about fashion clothes. When it comes to luxury, isn't it France and Italy? If the population is small, per capita GDP can exceed $30,000 if only one or two industries such as finance or IT do well, but if the population exceeds 50 million, it must do well in all fields. France has a well-developed industry and has the second largest economy in the EU after Germany. Here, France has two things that Germany does not have. The first is the seat of a permanent member of the UN, and the second is nuclear weapons. Therefore, in terms of political diplomacy and military power, it can be said that it is the strongest in Europe. I greeted President Blanc. Nice to meet you. When I greeted him in English, he also spoke English naturally. Nice to meet you, Xiao Kong Jinhu. Seeing you in person is much more handsome than seeing it on TV. Ellie said hello. Good morning. This is Ellie Kim. Wow. I've heard rumors, but you're a really great beauty. It's overrated. Haha, I enjoyed the video that came out as a model. The way she naturally touches Ellie's body while having a conversation is annoying. Is it the bad habit of French men? As France's youngest president, he had a strong image of a young and capable leader in his early days as a leader. But now the rating has changed a bit. In fact, the current economic situation in France is not very good. Companies are reducing investment due to the deterioration of the manufacturing economy, jobs are not increasing because there are no factories, and the treatment and welfare of workers have continued to deteriorate. However, in this situation, President Blanc announced that he would revitalize investment, cut taxes on wealth and capital income, and raise the fuel tax by more than 10%. Oil tax, a tax on oil, was in the past recognized as a tax paid by the wealthy. People without money use public transport, while people with money drive large displacement cars. But this is all a thing of the past. These days, newer large cars are more fuel efficient than old small cars. And while rich people live in the city center and rarely use a car, ordinary people who cannot afford the high monthly rent are pushed to the outskirts of the city, making it impossible to live without a car. As a result, the fuel tax is in fact a retrogressive tax, which is paid more by people without money. The French government has told them to switch to fuel-efficient cars or electric cars, but if they had the money in the first place, then why would they oppose a fuel tax increase? In the end, the workers exploded and violent protests took place across France from the end of last year. What had accumulated in the minds of workers exploded due to the fuel tax hike. The media always criticizes the violence of the Korean Union, but if you look at the protests of French workers, this is almost no civil war. In the end, President Blanc started to evolve to abolish the fuel tax increase, but protests and resignation movements were still continuing. The two leaders also exchanged greetings with other Korean businessmen besides me. Everyone had just arrived, so the fatigue of the flight was not relieved. Therefore, the dinner held at the hotel was soon over. Everyone seemed tired, but they couldn't rest. Representatives of large companies and small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, and working-level staff gathered in one place, and the meeting was held until late at night. Looking at the atmosphere, it doesn't seem like it would be easy. Because they know that we are in a bad situation. It is not easy to deal with Germans. If Korea and Japan have a trade dispute, which side will Germany and France take? The answer is that neither side takes sides. And in the meantime, I'll take care of what I need for both countries. The fact that we came here in the first place was nothing more than telling us that we were in a position of regret. Well, I already guessed it. Realistically, it is impossible to buy all the materials and parts that have been imported from Japan elsewhere. However, even if Korean companies buy only 10% of the core materials and parts they buy from Japan, their dependence on trade with Japan will be greatly reduced. It's not like taking off clothes at Dongdaemun and it's not over. The contract is for 1 year by default. If Korean companies change suppliers, Japanese companies' parts cannot be used for a while even if sanctions are lifted later. Anyway, the Japanese government imposed sanctions at will, so if they realize that they are at a disadvantage, they will be able to lift the sanctions on their own. The goal is to increase our bargaining power by securing additional suppliers. I looked around the staff and said, "It is us, not over there, that hold the key to the negotiations. So, negotiate with an attitude that you will not negotiate unfavorably." Karras decided to publicly present the new car at the Detroit Convention Center. He didn't mention it himself, but everyone guessed what kind of car it was. It is an electric truck capable of autonomous driving. Besides Karras, almost all automakers make electric vehicles. However, the electric truck, a commercial vehicle, was another area of challenge. Nikola was originally due to announce the electric truck Cologne this year. However, due to severe financial difficulties, the development plan was practically halted, and the development manpower left in large numbers. Darrell brought in people from Nikola to spur the development. Rumors circulated that a concept car had already been released or that it was preparing for mass production. However, the release date was suddenly pushed forward by 10 days. In response, some media speculated that it might have something to do with Kang Jin-hoo's trip to Germany. In any case, with the media and the general audience gathered, Carlosio Darrell took the stage. As usual, he appeared as exhausted as ever and said in a calm voice, "The car to be introduced here is an electric truck ADT-1 from Karras." Karras announced plans to mass-produce electric trucks, and installed self-driving modules on existing Unsung trucks to show platooning. Even now, platooning of logistics trucks in a row is cruising across the United States. Except for the lead car, there were no people on board, so there was a lot of concern about accidents, but so far no accidents have occurred. Then the curtain rises, revealing ADT-1. The shape of the truck, designed to reduce the drag coefficient, was reminiscent of a high-speed rail. The biggest problem in the development of electric trucks is the battery. Existing diesel trucks also have a fuel efficiency of 20% compared to passenger cars, so electric trucks are equipped with batteries that are several times larger than those of electric vehicles. You may think that increasing the battery capacity is not enough, but controlling heat and stability while increasing the capacity is not an easy task. The bigger problem is that as the capacity increases, the charging time also increases. In logistics, time is money. They are transporting in a hurry to meet the date, but it is impossible to stop for an hour to recharge. Other automakers have also studied from various angles to solve this problem. A method of connecting the current collector to a power line like a streetcar or laying a coil under the road to charge wirelessly was discussed. In some countries, it was also piloted on highways frequented by logistics trucks. However, these methods require a lot of initial cost as they eventually have to build the device on the road. Karras researchers and Professor Haman Kim suggested a different way. It is a battery replacement system that completely replaces a discharged battery with a fully charged battery. Darrell posted a video. As the electric truck stopped at the center, the machine pulled out the battery mounted on the bottom and inserted a fully charged battery. It takes only 2 minutes to change the ADT-1 battery. It is a simple method anyone can think of, but the actual process of making it was not so simple. However, Professor Haman Kim did the difficult task. It succeeded in reducing heat generation and securing safety while making a large capacity replaceable battery. Another problem was solved naturally by adopting this method. The biggest problem with electric vehicles is price. Logistics trucks are several times more expensive as the battery capacity has increased. Experts expected it to be at least $250,000. However, the price announced later was a shock in itself. ADT-1 is priced at $150,000. This is similar to the existing diesel trucks. Even with various autonomous driving technologies and safety devices, it was impossible to come up with such a price. Darrell smiled lightly. As everyone may have been surprised, it is the price of tea. Batteries not included. At those words, The people present at the presentation hall had bewildered expressions on their faces. How to drive an electric vehicle without a battery. Batteries are rented for a fixed amount as they can be replaced. There will be rental and replacement costs, but will be less than 30% of the original fuel price. ADT1 equipped with cutting-edge autonomous driving technology and OTK battery can significantly reduce labor and fuel costs. It is expected to reduce logistics costs by more than 90% compared to conventional diesel trucks. Darrell's announcement was a refreshing shock. Even today, the price of an electric vehicle battery is comparable to that of a car. But how many times the capacity of a logistics truck would be awesome? So the idea was to sell the car but rent the battery for a monthly fee. In this way, the consumer can significantly lower the initial cost, and the company can earn a stable monthly income. In the next 10 years, 80% of the logistics trucks on the road will be turned into unmanned electric trucks. In the case of a car used at home, the driving time is only 1 or 2 hours a day, and the driving distance per year is about 20,000 kilometers at most. But logistics trucks are a different story. Except for loading, unloading, and refueling times, drivers take turns on the road all day. The mileage per year is often more than 200,000 kilometers. As such, they deteriorate quickly and most of them will be scrapped within 10 years. Unmanned electric vehicles are more economical than existing logistics trucks and are environmentally friendly. Depending on the time of mass production, this statement can become a reality. Several companies have already announced plans to develop electric trucks, and concept cars and prototypes have also been released. However, none of them led to actual mass production. Darrell said as if he were professed. ADT1 is scheduled to be released in the second half of this year, and the process line has already been established. We will also establish 100 battery replacement centers in the United States before launch. Electricity is in short supply during peak hours and surplus at night. It aims to relieve the burden on the power grid by charging the discharged battery at night. After the presentation was over, the participants stood up in unison and applauded. Karos ADT1, the beginning of the logistics revolution. The era of driverless cars begins in earnest. GM and Ford to cooperate with Karos in the commercial vehicle sector. The concern and antipathy of driverless cars is not great. Experts estimate that the unmanned electric truck will contribute to logistics efficiency and price stability. I was checking the articles that came up after the presentation and Ellie asked, "Why didn't Jinhu attend the presentation?" "You can't pay attention to me. It is the executives and developers who have worked hard for the new car announcement that deserves spotlight and applause. Even if the platooning technology was commercialized, it would be possible to create an unmanned electric truck so quickly. In a way, it's not a big change. It is simply that the existing logistics trucks are changed to be cheaper and more efficient. But in a different way, it was a revolution in logistics. Logistics contributes to the efficient allocation of resources. An object that is useless in one area becomes useful in another area. In one area, rice overflowed and rotted due to a bountiful harvest, while in another area, there were cases of starvation. The delivery app has changed the way you call a restaurant directly to order and pay through the app. Consumers and restaurants remain the same, and even though ordering and payment has become easier, the number of orders at restaurants has increased significantly. And delivery apps have grown tremendously. In this way, the added value of society as a whole is greatly enhanced just by activating logistics. There was no need to explain this in my own words. The media already knew and poured out articles about the impact it would have on global logistics. Improvements in inland logistics will also affect ship and air transport. As a result, the industry as a whole is on the alert and has revised its strategy for the future. I spoke to Darrell. "I enjoyed the presentation. Aren't you overdoing it for me?" The staff suffered a little. "I'm glad it ended safely though. Go home early today and get some rest." Looking at his face at the presentation, dark circles were down to his chin. "Anyone who sees will know that I am a vicious shareholder. But Daryl said excitedly, "Even though we have not yet received official reservations, hundreds of pre-orders are coming in from companies. Walmart says they will pay the full amount in advance and wait. When the battery rental cost and replacement cost are combined, the fuel cost is less than a third of the existing one, and there is no need for a driver. Compared to the existing diesel truck driven by the driver, it is possible to recover the cost within 1 year at the earliest. The problem is that you are unemployed. If 5 cars are platooning, only the leading car needs to be occupied in case of an emergency. In the end, 4 out of 5 people will lose their jobs. We are discussing the matter with the government. As I said before, we have decided to hire drivers first at the factory we are expanding, and we plan to use a portion of the sales funds to pay unemployment benefits or help reemployment. We are discussing reducing the working hours and increasing the welfare of existing drivers with companies that buy Karis trucks. Unemployment is a problem, but we will find a way out somehow. 'Cause it's always been like that." After talking to Daryl, I got a call from the White House. "I enjoyed the presentation. You made a great car again." After the presentation, he tweeted, "Another victory for American manufacturing. What have I done? It's all done by American technology." Ronald said congratulations and then brought the point. "Right now the Japanese side is lobbying a lot for mediation. Not long ago, the Japanese ambassador to the United States visited the Secretary of State and said he was going to die." I laughed bitterly. "It's strange. The sanctions were imposed by Japan, so what the hell are you going to do with South Korea?" That's it. The big guy blew the buns. However, the guy I thought would be quiet if he got hit with one shot rushed to his death. When this happened, the big guy lost his desire to fight. However, I hit him first, apologized and backed away, and I can see the kids watching. The best thing is for the teacher to come and dry it. In addition to this, it would be better if you scold the person who got hit. South Korea and Japan are important allies of the United States. Therefore, in the United States, no matter who did good or bad, as long as the two of you are friendly, it is enough. Japan, which has weak diplomatic power compared to its economic power, has long been lobbying the U.S. politicians. For this reason, the United States has largely neglected or sided with Japan in the disputes between Korea and Japan so far. So, from the Japanese point of view, they also want to solve this issue with the help of the United States. Of course, you can't leave it like that. In fact, the current situation is not so bad for America. This is because some of the Korean companies that do a lot of business with Japan are negotiating with U.S. companies. Samsung Electronics and SSK Nix decided to increase imports of U.S. products for semiconductor equipment and materials, making Ronald happy. Children fight, but they always reconcile as if they did. Aren't you familiar with the peculiarities of Korea-Japan relations? Not really. Still, there's a lot of talk here and there. Even if it is economically profitable, the two main allies in East Asia are fighting, so there is no choice but to worry about the Washington political party. I reassured Ronald. "I'll finish it soon so you don't mind." While the executives of individual companies were negotiating with urgent items, I met with people from the German automobile industry with Chairman Im Jin-young. Tobias Hilbert, Chairman of the BMW Group, Gunter Hartmann, Chairman of Daimler AG, and George Rohr, Chairman of the Volkswagen Group. There are dozens of brands that these three own, and if you add up their market capitalization, still it's not enough for Karis. It's my first time, but I've met Chairman Im Jin-young a few times before. He greeted us friendly in German. "Do you speak German?" I learned a little bit when I was young. After all, he was destined to inherit a business from the moment he was born, so he must have been educated. After the greeting, Chairman Hilbert said, "I enjoyed the ADT1 presentation. Congratulations. You probably got the information long before the announcement." I told them. As Europe is connected as one continent, the logistics revolution caused by the driverless electric truck will strengthen the unity of the EU community and promote the economic development of European countries. Everyone said congratulations, but the inside seemed complicated. Just because it's a profit overall doesn't mean everyone can benefit. Competitors in particular are likely to lose money. You're probably pounding the income statement hard in your head. I spoke up first. These days, few people buy a smartphone because they do not have a smartphone, or who buys a car because they do not have a car. Most of the time they just replace the existing product. But these days the replacement cycle is getting longer and longer because the product is well made. Therefore, new functions that may or may not be useful are continuously added, and the existing products are made to look old and replaced. However, there are times when replacement demand surges all at once. It is the moment when the paradigm of the product itself changes. You remember when smartphones first came out? Initially, it was used by professionals and some curious people. People who used to use feature phones didn't even know why they needed it. There is a saying that new technology creates inconvenience, not convenience. The same is true for self-driving electric vehicles. Once you ride it, you realize just how uncomfortable the old car is. The car of the future is just the beginning. In the near future, the demand to switch from gasoline and diesel vehicles to electric vehicles will explode in an instant. And the future fate of the company will be determined by how much market share it takes. After my words were finished, Chairman Im Jin-yong said with a smile, "Then let's start talking, shall we?" After Karas announced ADT1, Jin-Ho Kong made a full-fledged move in Europe. Kang Jin-Ho said openly that he would reduce dependence on trade with Japan and further strengthen economic cooperation with the EU. It was also a new opportunity for Europe. Korea is the 11th largest economy in the world. Among EU countries, only Germany, France, and Italy have a higher GDP than Korea, excluding the UK. Compared to European countries, Korea has a faster and more dynamic economic growth. And above all else, as there is Jin-Ho Kong, the expansion of trade with Korea was what Europe also wanted. Unlike Korea, which was seeking a breakthrough, Japan was in turmoil. In particular, the sense of crisis felt by automakers was serious. Germany and France alone have 5 of the world's top 10 automakers. With the announcement of the unmanned electric truck, Karas reached out to commercial vehicles as well as passenger cars. What will happen if Jin-Ho Kong uses self-driving technology and the supply of OTK batteries as bait to reduce the use of Japanese parts? Companies will not be able to follow the instructions unconditionally, but they will not be able to avoid seeing Jin-Ho Kong, who has the capital and technology in his hands. Japanese business groups all urged the politicians to normalize Korea-Japan relations. Unlike Japan, who was upset, Korea did not even care about this incident at all. The Korean government silently proceeded with the seizure of assets against the judgment of compensation for forced labor without revealing any position. They did not even respond to the Japanese backlash as if they were doing what they had to do. In a nutshell, the economic cooperation with the EU was also carried out by Kang Jin-Ho at will, and the Korean government had nothing to do with it. Japanese politicians have even talked about filing a complaint with the WTO, but in a situation in which Japan imposed sanctions first, it is only like the person who beats him to the police station. The Japanese government attempted to contact South Korea under the water for a solution. Korea has been a colony of Japan for a long time, and has maintained close relations with Japan even after liberation. To that extent, pro-Japanese figures were widely spread out in the political and bureaucratic society. They've been lobbying hard for so long, so they'll be happy to move for the sake of Japan. But for some reason, everyone tried to avoid the meeting itself. When asked why, he said he doesn't mind confronting the government, but he doesn't want to get involved with Kang Jin-Ho. Fortunately, the Liberal People's Party was the only one that represented Japan's position. It didn't help much. Now the only thing they could count on was the US. If the US orders it, South Korea has no choice but to follow. Japan tried to move the United States by mobilizing all its lobbying powers, but everyone did not move as they heard anything from above. Meanwhile, Korean companies negotiated with European companies for precision machinery, core materials and parts. Since many complex issues such as product specifications, production volume, transportation, and customs are intertwined, the actual contract will be made after reviewing the details. But MOUs, which can be called the pre-contract stage, have been signed one after another. Jin Hu-kong announced each item and amount each time an MOU was signed, as if he was making fun of Japan, and Japanese companies whose supply contracts were cut off each time screamed. There were also rumors that it could drive all the additional production of OTK batteries to European companies in the future. If even German and French automakers turn to technical alliances with Keris, the isolation of the Japanese auto industry will become even more severe. While the Japanese government was busy preparing countermeasures, another article appeared. Just in time, the EU summit meeting was scheduled in Brussels, Belgium, and EU leaders gathered in Belgium one after another. And Jin Hu-kong was invited to the event. Prime Minister Okazaki was shocked when he heard the news. What else is this kid going to do there?